Imagine this. You're sitting inside a T-90, the steel beast of the Russian army. The hatch is shut, the world outside is muffled, and the only light comes from green instrument panels and a dim slit of daylight through periscopes. Suddenly, an impact. The whole turret shakes as if a giant hammer just struck it. A deafening bang, a flash, the smell of burning fuel, and in that split second you realize you're not in control anymore. Have you ever wondered what really happens to a T-90 crew in that moment? Today, we're pulling you inside the machine. The T-90 was born as the heir of decades of Soviet armored doctrine. It's sleek, angular, and terrifying at first sight. But the fate of its crew, when that armor is breached, is anything but glorious. To understand why, we need to rewind. In World War II, Soviet crews fought in the legendary T-34. It was simple, rugged, mass-produced. The armor was thin, but there were thousands of them. Crews knew the risk. A Panzer shell could rip through at any moment, but numbers and mobility often made up for it. Survival was a lottery. Out of every 5 T-34s sent into a battle, often only 2 would return. Fast forward to the Cold War. The T-72, designed in the late 1960s, introduced the infamous autoloader carousel under the turret. No more fourth crewman, just 3 men crammed inside, surrounded by ammunition. It was efficient, compact, and deadly, both for the enemy and sometimes for the crew. A well-placed hit could ignite the propellant charges stored beneath their feet, launching the entire turret skyward in a grotesque display, nicknamed the Jack-in-the-Box effect. Crews didn't stand a chance. Now enter the T-90, marketed as the Evolution, the Fix, the Survivor. It carries a 125mm smoothbore gun, advanced fire control systems, explosive reactive armor, and even an active protection system designed to intercept the incoming rockets. On paper, it's one of the most advanced tanks Russia ever built. But here's the haunting truth. Its core design is still chained to the past. The autoloader remains. The crew still sits in a tight metal box surrounded by ammunition. And physics hasn't changed. When energy pierces the armor, that energy has to go somewhere. So what does a hit feel like inside a T-90? First comes the shockwave. Even if the armor holds, the overpressure rattles lungs, eardrums, bones. The heat can sear eyebrows off in a blink. If the round penetrates, it doesn't arrive gently. It sprays molten copper fragments at supersonic speed, slicing through flesh and steel alike. The carousel becomes a bomb. The floor beneath the crew's feet a death trap. And unlike Western tanks, which place ammo behind armored doors with blowout panels, the T-90 keeps most of it inside the same space the men are sitting. Think about that. A tank that costs millions, crewed by men who train for years, can be lost in less than a second. No time to unbuckle, no time to open the hatch, sometimes not even time to scream. History repeats itself. The Soviet logic of numbers over crew survival lingers, even in this so-called modern tank. But here's where it gets more unsettling. The T-90 isn't just about armor and firepower, it's about psychology. Crews inside know what happened to their fathers and grandfathers in T-72s in Chechnya, in Syria, in Ukraine. They've seen the footage of turrets blown clear off. They've heard the nickname whispered among soldiers, the steel coffin. Yet they climb in, seal the hatch, and roll forward. Because that's the job. You might wonder, why design it this way? Why risk everything on speed, firepower, and cost, while sacrificing the men inside? The answer lies in doctrine. Soviet and Russian military philosophy has long accepted higher human losses in exchange for overwhelming numbers and firepower. Tanks are not built to protect crews at all costs. They're built to win battles, even if it means burning through crews along the way. And so, Every time a T-90 takes a hit, it's not just steel clashing with steel. It's history repeating. From the T-34's thin armor, to the T-72's deadly carousel, to the T-90's promise of protection, it all leads back to the same haunting moment. 3 men, trapped inside, praying the next explosion isn't theirs. So the next time you see footage of a T-90 destroyed on the battlefield, remember, it's not just a machine that's lost. It's 3 lives, sealed inside a steel shell, caught in the split-second line between survival and annihilation. And this is only the beginning of the story. Because what happens after that hit, the split-second decisions, the chain reactions inside the tank, and the brutal truth of survival rates, that's what we uncover next. But before we continue, if you want to dive deeper into these hidden stories of war machines and the people inside them, hit that subscribe button and drop a like. It helps more than you think, and it means I'll keep bringing you the truth that others won't show. You've seen what it feels like to be inside a T-90 when the steel walls shake from a hit. But to really understand the fate of its crew, you have to look at the machine itself. The way it's built, the way 3 men fit into a space barely larger than a family car, and the choices that engineers made decades ago that still decide who lives and who dies today. The T-90 carries a 3-man crew: commander, gunner, driver. No loader. That job was eliminated by the carousel autoloader, a rotating drum under the turret floor that holds 22 rounds. It was an innovation meant to save space and manpower. Instead of a soldier ramming shells by hand, a mechanical arm lifts the propellant charge and shell, shoves it into the breech, and resets. In theory, it can fire every 7 to 8 seconds, as long as the mechanism works. Efficient, yes. But the trade-off? The crew now sits directly on top of high explosive charges, with barely any separation. Western tanks like the Abrams or the Leopard 2 store their ammunition in a separate armored compartment. If it's hit, blowout panels vent the explosion upward, away from the crew. The tank might be destroyed, but the men inside stand a chance. In the T-90, that buffer doesn't exist. A single penetration into the carousel often means a catastrophic chain reaction. One charge ignites another, then another, until the entire turret is launched skyward in that notorious jack-in-the-box effect. It's not a metaphor. Footage from battlefields shows turrets hurled dozens of meters away from the burning hull. Inside, the commander and gunner sit shoulder to shoulder in the turret, crammed against the breech of the 125mm main gun and the thick turret walls. There's barely room to move. The gunner's controls are squeezed against the left, the commander's machine gun feed and optics to the right. Between them, high explosives, propellant charges, and the mechanism of the autoloader. A misstep, even during peacetime training, has cost limbs. Yes, the autoloader has literally taken arms and hands when soldiers moved carelessly. The driver sits in front, low in the hull, almost lying back in his seat. It's the most comfortable position in the tank, with more room and a bit of separation from the ammunition. But don't think that means safety. If the turret blows, the shockwave and flames often race forward, and there's no time to crawl out of that narrow hatch. In rare cases, drivers have survived when the turret was torn away. Survivors describe it as waking up in the middle of hell, crawling out of a burning wreck while the rest of the crew never made it. But let's step back. Why design such a trap? The answer lies in Soviet doctrine. A smaller tank is a cheaper tank. A tank with fewer crew means less training, faster production, and more tanks on the battlefield. The T-90 was meant to be built in numbers and fielded by armies, not by elite specialists. That's why it's compact, low profile, and dangerous not only to the enemy, but sometimes to its own men. Compare that to Western philosophy. NATO tanks are massive, towering over the battlefield. Heavier armor, larger silhouettes, but also much more focus on crew survival. The Abrams weighs over 60 tons. The Leopard 2, nearly the same. The T-90, closer to 46 tons. It's built to be agile, to cross rivers with a snorkel, to deploy quickly. But that agility comes at a cost, the thin margin between protection and annihilation. There are countless battlefield stories that prove this contrast. In Syria, a T-90 famously shrugged off a hit from an American-made TOW missile, its Contact 5 explosive armor plates detonating just in time to save the crew. The tank backed out, smoking but alive, hailed as proof that the T-90 was invincible. But in the very same war, other T-90s brewed up in flames after multiple hits, their turrets tossed aside like bottle caps. Survivors tell of hearing the whistle of incoming rockets, the split-second impact, then nothing but fire and chaos. It's not just about armor or firepower. It's about probability. Inside a T-90, you live with the knowledge that if the armor holds, you survive. If it doesn't, you won't. There is no middle ground. That's a brutal truth most documentaries won't spell out. But ask any tanker who's been there, they'll tell you. So let me turn this to you. Imagine being offered a seat inside one of these machines. The hatch closes, you're sealed in, the carousel of ammunition humming under your boots. Knowing what you know now, would you take that seat? Or would you walk away? Write your answer in the comments. Because I'm curious. How many of you would step inside, knowing the odds, and how many would refuse? And remember, this isn't just theory. The T-90 has already been tested in the deadliest arenas, the urban hell of Grozny, the ruins of Aleppo, and the open fields of Ukraine. That's where we go next. Grozny, winter 1994. Russian tank columns rolled into the Chechen capital expecting a parade of victory. The crews inside their T-72s and T-80s, and yes, T-90s in smaller numbers, thought the sight of armored steel would terrify the defenders into surrender. Instead, the city became a slaughterhouse. Imagine being a tanker that day. You advance down wide avenues, engines roaring, armor glinting. Then, silence breaks. RPG fire slams from upper floors, from basements, from alleyways. One hit after another. Crews inside had no idea where it came from. The gunner tries to traverse, the commander screams coordinates. But the turret turns too slow, the gun depression too shallow. By the time they lock on a target, another rocket streaks from a different angle. In Grozny, tank crews lived a nightmare. They were trapped in steel coffins on narrow streets, unable to maneuver. Chechen fighters let the lead and rear vehicles burn, boxing the column in. The rest? Easy prey. Some T-90s survived hits thanks to their reactive armor, but many weren't so lucky. When the ammunition carousel ignited, the turret didn't just rattle. It launched skyward, 100 tons of steel hurled by the explosion. Survivors called it the cemetery of turrets. And inside those tanks, there were no survivors. This was the rebirth of the old truth. Technology alone doesn't save you. The T-90 was built on lessons from the T-72, trying to fix its flaws. But against determined fighters in an urban jungle, even the newest tank became a target. If infantry support failed, if tactics broke down, the machine turned into a death trap. Crews in Grozny described hearing other tanks exploding one after another. Each fireball not just steel, but friends, comrades, lives gone in seconds. Move forward a decade. Syria, 2016. Footage emerges of a T-90 hit by a US-made TOW missile. The missile strikes, a flash, smoke clears, and the tank is still there. its Contact 5 reactive armor worked. The crew inside survives, backs the tank out. Russian media hails it as proof of the T-90's invincibility. But days later, other videos surface. T-90s burning in Aleppo, hit from the sides or top, their turrets blown off just like in Grozny. Crews weren't so lucky. That duality, the savior and the coffin, is what defines the T-90. Sometimes it takes a hit and shrugs it off. Other times, one strike is enough to end 3 lives instantly. It all depends on angle, distance, luck. On the battlefield, probability decides more than armor thickness. Think about what this does to a crew's mind. You're inside, strapped in, knowing the next corner could hide an RPG, the next ridge a missile team. You trust your machine, but deep down you know. If the carousel cooks off, there's no way out. Some crews wrote final notes, tucked into pockets. Others joked darkly about becoming cosmonauts, blasted skyward with their turrets. These aren't statistics. They're real men, living with the certainty that survival is always 50-50 at best. And now we come to today. The wide fields of Ukraine. No dense city blocks here, but drones buzzing overhead, precision-guided missiles waiting in ambush, artillery raining down from miles away. It's not the Chechens with RPGs anymore. It's javelins, NLAWs, drones dropping explosives straight into open hatches. Against that, even the T-90M, the most advanced version, sometimes stands no chance. Videos circulate daily. Turrets ripped away, hulls charred black, crews lost in an instant. This is the cruel irony of armored warfare. From the T-34s of World War II to the T-72s in Iraq to the T-90s in Grozny and Syria, the story hasn't changed. Steel evolves, weapons evolve. But the men inside are always the same, vulnerable, fragile, mortal. So the question is, if a tank as advanced as the T-90M can still be destroyed like its grandfather, what does that mean for the future of tanks at all? Are they still kings of the battlefield, or just moving targets for a new generation of weapons? That's what we'll face in the final part, where drones, precision missiles, and cold battlefield footage show the grim reality of the T-90's future. Ukraine, 2022. The battlefield looks nothing like Grozny or Aleppo. It's open fields, forests, small villages. But above it all, the constant buzz of drones. For T-90 crews, this is a new kind of hell. They're not just watching for ambushes at street corners or missile teams on ridgelines. Now death comes from above. Drones spot tank columns from miles away, relaying coordinates to artillery. Sometimes they don't even wait. They drop grenades or modified munitions straight onto hatches and engine decks. Crews that once relied on low profiles and reactive armor find themselves helpless. There's no armor plate on the roof thick enough to stop a charge dropped precisely on target. A tank that once survived the heat of Syria can be destroyed by a quadcopter costing a fraction of one shell it carries. Then there are the modern missiles. Javelins and NLAWs don't hit tanks from the front, where armor is strongest. They strike from above, diving onto the turret roof, the weakest point. That's why so many videos from Ukraine show the same image. The blackened hull of a T-90, turret thrown meters away, smoke pouring skyward. Crews often don't even see the missile coming. In thermal footage, they're gone before they can react. Some T-90s have survived hits. The newer T-90M Pro Rev has improved armor, relict explosive protection, and better systems. There are stories of crews walking away from direct strikes. But the pattern is clear. Every defense has its counter, every upgrade its answer. For every tank that survives, another burns. And every time, it's 3 men who pay the price. What does that feel like for the crews? Imagine sealing yourself into a machine knowing you're visible to satellites, drones, sensors you can't even detect. You're not fighting face to face. You're hunted. Some soldiers describe it as claustrophobic, like waiting in a locked room, hearing footsteps outside, not knowing when the door will burst open. Others harden themselves, focusing on duty, not survival. But the truth is, the psychological weight is as heavy as the steel above their heads. And yet, despite all this, tanks keep rolling. Because as flawed as the T-90 is, it still delivers something no infantry squad can: firepower, shock, the ability to smash through defenses. Militaries can't abandon them. They adapt, add cages against drones, weld steel screens, drape chains over turrets. Crews call them cope cages. They don't always work, but when you're the one sitting inside, you cling to any hope. Look at the arc of history. In World War II, T-34 crews fought knowing their odds were slim. In the Cold War, T-72 crews sat above a carousel of explosives. In Chechnya, they burned in narrow streets. In Syria, some survived, some didn't. And now in Ukraine, the cycle continues. The tank evolves, weapons evolve, but the core truth remains. Inside that steel, survival is never guaranteed. This is the final paradox of the T-90. It's a symbol of power, the pride of Russia's armored forces, a machine meant to intimidate and dominate. But for the men inside, it's also a gamble. One hit, one wrong angle, and they're not warriors. They're casualties. And when you see a destroyed T-90 on the battlefield, remember, that blackened wreck isn't just steel. It was 3 men, sealed in, hoping against hope it wouldn't be their turn. Inside the tank, you don't think about politics. You don't think about strategy. You don't even think about history. You think about one thing: getting out alive. And for too many T-90 crews, that chance never comes.